the 26th day, my goodness, of 2023. I got a couple days left to 2023. Hope everybody's doing well. I know Christmas is hard on a lot of people. And it's gone for another year, so you'll be okay. We're going to cover the headlines from January on nuclear and in particular Fukushima, nuclear meltdowns. I apologize everybody, we've got to go through this routine of explaining people the reactors, the meltdowns quickly before we get started. So Reactor 1 was 100% meltdown, and decades of reactor cores at the top of the buildings are 100% meltdowns. Reactor 2 is 100% meltdown. Reactor and the fuel meltdowns. Each of the reactors in Japan, not counting the fuel pools at the top of the buildings, are equal to about 100 Chernobyls. All the reactors that I'm talking about have lost 2 fuel pools each at the top of each building. So that's 8 fuel pools. And every nuclear academic, every nuclear student, college, every nuclear alumni, every college professor would have known these reactors were gone and the fuel pools, and even today they're pretending that they're not gone. This is very, very worrisome that we have documented evidence of them claiming they're in a building that don't exist. I don't have anything to compare that to, because it's actually so severe. Your journalists worldwide have taken great pleasure in 80 years of making a living by doing everything but being educating you. Their job is to divide you and to hate you, because you got 80 years of them telling you that nuclear somehow is magically like bananas and sunshine, flying on an airplane and stuff like this. It's got nothing to do with that. This is why we talk about dirty bombs. Speaking of dirty bombs, there's no dirty bomb compares with a nuclear power plant event. And these depictions of the radioactive fallout from France are based on 1 million to 10 million physical atoms per cubic meter of air, covering the entire planet in 30 days. But it's only based on venting. It's not based on...
Get more details on Japan's nuclear crisis. We're joined by Brendan Kennedy, Professor of Chemistry at the University of Sydney. Dr. Kennedy, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Which are at the very top of the building.
You're welcome. The greatest threat...
Media's. Recently, in July the 13th, the story changed completely. So whatever they claimed and said doesn't even matter anymore, because now we got International Atomic Energy Agency spearheading a campaign to manipulate the entire population of Earth. And this is, the author is a professor of nuclear and quantum engineering. So if you can't trust him, we're in a lot of trouble, obviously. And guess what? We're in a lot of trouble. They're claiming that the 1.37 million tons of wastewater, what they call wastewater, of course, before the reactors melt down, they need 4,500 tons a minute, every minute. And they're claiming that there's only 2.2 grams of tritium, nothing else escaped the buildings that are actually missing. And that, don't worry, because there's like 3 grams of sugar. Now, they picked up 30 million one-ton bags, and the food was banned by 55 countries in 14 prefectures. So let me go back to this point, because we're going to jump into headline after headline after headline. We're just going to run through January of this year. And it's quite the story there. It's a brutal amount of work, and so I hope it works for everybody today. I'm sure it will. But I just want to articulate what they're talking about. 1.37 million tons. So let me bring up the poll. Are the pro-nuclear destroying Earth and its 8 million species with endless radioactive fallout? And the reason the poll is that way is because that's the best way to articulate what nuclear has been doing for 80 years. So normally the reactors are using 4,500 tons a minute, and there's 1,440 minutes in a day, which works out to 6,400,000. That's each reactor we're talking about. 6,480,000 tons. Now the tanks, for 12 years, they say they've been filling up, has 1.37 million tons. So each reactor normally would fill out up the 1,000 tanks they have there 5 times a day. So with 4 nuclear meltdowns, you can fill up all the tanks they would have 20 times a day normally before it runs out of control. And the reason they're using that much water is to cool the reactors, and electricity is a byproduct. Okay. So they're hoodwinking the entire planet. We're in real trouble. We have radioactive plumes covering the entire planet, and now they're claiming that nothing got out, and what did get out, they're claiming, is equal to 3 grams of sugar. Despite the fact the food was banned in 10 prefectures by 55 countries, and they picked up 30 million one-ton bags. Some media claims it's 60 million.
There's about 60 million tons of contaminated soil that's being stored, planned to be stored, outside the Fukushima Daiichi perimeter fence. So
alrighty, here we go. Just consider liking, subscribing, clicking the notification bells so that United Nations can ban you. Alrighty, are you ready for this? So we're going to cover the headlines that we covered January of this year, and I do got a few little pieces put in there, but you can't shift through. What I discovered today was I can't pick a extra paragraph or something out of each story, because the video would have to be 9 hours long or longer just to pull that off, and you can't do it. You can only do about 4 days worth of reading in order to get a show ready each night. Researchers push preprint reviews to improve scientific communication. So they're going to bypass journals' peer review process and just put their fake studies out there with no peer reviews whatsoever, which is just as well, because there is no peer reviewing in the stuff that matters. It's 100% public relation firms, and it gets a rubber stamp. A small nuclear reactor project here in Canada won't need extra assessment. And the time with this company that showed up out of nowhere and was going to make mixed oxide fuel reactors, ARC Clean Technology. And they're talking about putting small modular reactors at Point Lepreau in Nova Scotia, Canada. But there is no small modular reactors, for starters, and they don't have any complete applications into the regulatory agency. But what they're saying is they don't need no environmental or human impact studies because they got a waiver, which is absurd. These are mixed oxide fuel reactors. If they actually manage to build one, these absolutely gotta. The reason they just passed a process without no checks and balances because they can't pass an inspection, right? So they just gave them a waiver. And by the way, Point Lepreau, just in tritium releases legally each year, is 14,600,000 trillion atoms a year is released. It's disgusting. Canada is self-destructing because of this kind of emissions from their nuclear power plants. It's not just tritium. Nuclear power, radioactive waste to be buried at Gwen plant in radioactive waste to be buried at the nuclear site itself because it's cheaper, right? And who cares about the communities and and remember, these are built alongside of water. They're going to be built deep in the water tables, and you know that the waste will melt down at some point. Brighton appoints a professor to the nuclear waste panel, and what we've been able to prove here over a very long term is that a professor is not somebody that I would let walk a dog, let alone trust him with nuclear waste. Sweden Nuclear Fuel Management for the final repository extension. Now they're phasing out nuclear, but they're going to put their nuclear waste under the ocean. And what they're talking about is low-level waste under the oceans. Why would they put their nuclear waste under the ocean? Because there's going to be high-level waste and it's going to melt down at some point, and the water will stop it from being exposed, but it'll still destroy the planet eventually. And water, of course, water is your most important asset. You can't survive without your water every day. See how long you can last without water. And see how long anything. Don't give water to a plant. Don't give water to your pets, and see what happens. And water is so special. It's so important. It deserves nothing but respect. Like, you literally should worship water because you have no life. It's the most important thing that this planet and any other place you can go to. You can't survive without water. And what does water do for you? It makes you healthy, it makes you refreshed, it cleans you up. It does everything for you. And what do you do for water? You take it for granted. Not everybody, but the majority of people take it for granted. Water deserves our utmost respect. And the nuclear industry is, in many senses, attacking water because their emissions, of course, ends up in a majority of it will eventually end up in the water. Inside Project Blue Peacock, the most outrageous nuclear plot in the entire Cold War. So what they were going to do, because they were worried that the Soviet Union was going to invade. I can't remember the whole story. They were going to invade. The Americans were going to build, because they were down in that area, they were going to build nuclear weapons underground and put them on a timer. So they were going to dig pits, and if the Soviets were going to look like they were going to rush through and occupy, they were going to bury nuclear bombs. But in the wintertime, how do you stop the nuclear bombs from freezing? And so they decided that they were going to bury it with a bunch of live chickens because the nuclear weapons would have been detonated within 6 days. So they figured if you put live chickens in with the nuclear, that would keep the nuclear weapons from freezing. Try making that one up on your own. Inside a chicken-powered nuclear bombs. Rental needed term 300,000 years. This is high-level waste. And a Florida company scheduled to finish moving radioactive fuel rods from the shuttered Indian Point nuclear power plant. So they need a spot to put it for 300,000 years. It's still splitting atoms, right? But there is nowhere you can put it. Wherever you put it, eventually it's going to melt down if you don't deal with it. Artificial intelligence chatbots. Exciting breakthrough or dangerous tool. It's a dangerous weapon against humanity. And now it's been unleashed. The most significant breakthrough of 2022 was in nuclear fusion. Despicable nuclear fusion. Which is still decades away from being a reality, which is one of the most true statements imaginable. But the advent of artificial intelligence, and the new technology has no guardrails, no safeguards. Vox Populi. Shame on you, Prime Minister, for your blatant... This is the Japan Prime Minister Kishida. This is a Nami. Nami was abandoned for 7 years straight, which meant you should have never went back. It's in the Fukushima prefecture from radioactive fallout. Imagine banding your community after community after community. That's the only thing that can cause that is nuclear. And the Japanese people have protested nuclear, but they got lulled into complacency. This is Nami. This is a nuclear wasteland. Nobody should have ever been forced or tricked or manipulated to go back in there. Biden is among just 9 people with the power to destroy all life on Earth. It's common knowledge that all these prime ministers and presidents are appointed, not elected. There's very influential corporations and entities that will get them elected. And so Biden doesn't have his finger on the button. It's those corporations do. U.S. spending bill passed with more money from Hanford. Well, first off, 90% of all the money that you don't see these at Fukushima for some reason, these outfits, where they got their own Scotty backpacks, fresh air backpacks. They figured they're going to need at least another $700 billion for that site. And 90% of the money goes to administration stolen. The administration just goes through immigrants and homeless and destitute people to get 10% of the work, and they get massive bonuses. The bonuses these people get, because you're talking about so much money, are absurd. But that's what you got to do. You got to give these people huge monies to be that kind of evil. And I know I was talking to one of these guys. He told me he had 26 cars. Hot rods. So they get real bonuses, don't they? They're real scumbags, too. That guy was a real scumbag. Department of Energy could be operating the low-level waste facility as soon as the end of December 2023 to treat the least radioactive of the 56 million gallons of radioactive waste, which is in 177 tanks. They dumped 450 billion gallons right in the soil in the same area of the same stuff. Plutonium, uranium, very, very harsh radioactive materials during the Manhattan Project in particular. And that's equal to 1.4 million tanks. And the 56 million is equal to 177 tanks. And look how much money they've blown just on these 177 tanks. It's 100 billion or something now. So imagine if they tried to recover the 1.4 million tanks to 450 billion gallons of radioactive sludge they dumped into the soil in pits that were unlined. And to put it into perspective, it's the equivalent of a 6-foot wide aquarium, 518 feet tall, wrapped around the entire planet more than once. Yeah, but it all fits in a swimming pool, Dana. The industry entire legacy is predicated upon perpetual lies. This will start moving pretty quick soon. UK moving bioweapons research out of Ukraine. What the hell is that? I forget because I meant to read that particular story. U.S. moving bioweapons research out of Ukraine 2022. I suppose they are. New scale, complete small reactor design guide, step 1, close to construction. Now, we know that's not true, right? Because all their money, all the communities that they tricked into buying into their scam, their Ponzi scheme, have pulled out, right? They weren't close to construction. They never even tried to construct. That was January of this year. They didn't even lay foundations. They don't even have land. They never intended to. It was strictly about taking the money from all those communities and using it for their own. Well, 90% of the money goes into administration, typically in any nuclear venture. This one is more like 99.9% of the money goes to administration. You know, like 26 muscle cars. The major components of the reactors can be fabricated almost entirely at the plant instead of on site. So a year later, when we look at this story, we realize how evil they actually are. How dishonest and disingenuous these people actually are. PNM surprised by approval of battery storage project up to 200 megawatts. But why wouldn't you use like geothermal? Why would you use batteries? It's ridiculously cheap to do geothermal and get the same amount of energy as it is to do batteries. It's ludicrous to use batteries. You're only good for a couple of hours. Geothermal is good for 24 hours a day, non-stop, for 50, 60 years. And all you got to do is just recycle everything and build another geothermal plant. Christmas bombing. 200 nuke bombers loaded with 20,000 tons of bombs, which is 40 million pounds, conducted one of the biggest air raids in history. 200 nuke bombers. So in their glory, they wanted to nuke Vietnam. They wanted to nuke China, the crazies. And it seems like when you put a uniform on these people, then there's nothing they won't do. There's no evil they won't perpetrate against humanity and water. Smart water meters could prevent your bills from soaring to $1,500 a month, which is you're paying for water, right? That's what a water meter is. They're charging you for your water. It's a very basic right of every species on the planet. Smart water meters could, but won't, prevent your bills from soaring. Like, how could your water bill get to $1,500 a month? If it's due to a leak, then town council's responsible for it. You already paid them to maintain that whole system through your taxes, right? That's why they exist in the first place. Keep the roads upgraded, to keep the telephone poles, to change the light bulbs, and to take care of your water infrastructure. You paid for it a long time ago. And water is your most precious resource, period, bar nothing. Without water, it all goes to hell. 1 in 4 older Britons could lose state pension under think tank recommendation. Think tank. So think tank, a corporation starts up in your country, calls himself a think tank, and then they can take away your pensions. Something you worked 60 years for, or until you're 65 years of age. And they can make a recommendation and say, well, yeah, they got to take their pension. They're just slaves. They don't deserve it. Give the money to us. We're a think tank. War in Ukraine eclipses opposition to Japan's nuclear policy shift. The war in Ukraine wasn't an accident. Right? You know, Vladimir Putin was a young global's leader with the World Economic Forum, for goodness sakes. And Zelensky is a straw man. And then Justin Trudeau was the World Economic Forum. Angela Merkel was a young global leader also with the World Economic Forum. Many of the shakers and movers, if not all of them, in the last couple of decades have spent a lot of time at the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab. We need an ESCON state of emergency. That's Africa. They got a nuclear plant down there built on a fault line where they got inferior material was used, that's the one Klaus Schwab built, wasn't it? The World Economic Forum leader, Hitler's little puppet, Klaus Schwab. 11 years post Fukushima, Japan won't back down from nuclear energy. Well, they don't have the workforce anymore, right? They don't have the supply network anymore. It's 100% posturing what we see them talking about. And they're opening up reactors that can't stay open much longer because they're all decrepit and fragile and brittle. And Japan's got stupid amount of geothermal. And no, sir, they won't use it. The big challenge is choosing a nuclear career in Japan. Choosing a nuclear career in Japan. And this was a real, first off, that's the first time we went back into the control room of number 4 reactor, which is separate from the building because the building doesn't exist anymore. But that's the first time we went back in 7 years. Is that picture right there. And remember, we seen a blogger that was allowed in there about a month ago, and he had a flashlight because there was no lights in there. There is no role for nuclear, which meant they just switched off. There's no role for nuclear in New York's future energy mix. Thank goodness. This month, nuclear fusion took a step. Nuclear fusion took a step forward by generating a little more electricity. Right, and so the same group came out a few days back, and we covered the story, where they claimed they got enough energy to boil, extra energy to boil 11 kettles of water. So you're talking about 150 million degrees Fahrenheit temperatures. And so how much water can you boil at 150 million degrees Fahrenheit temperatures that you're able to extrapolate an extra 11 gallons out of? It's a total scam. The fusion is just one great big stupid scam. South China, Morning Post, and paid post by the Japan Reconstruction Agency. So here's the Japan, which is disgusting. Ichibori, the current governor of Fukushima Prefecture, right? Japan Reconstruction, and he's a despicable monster, to say the least. Japan Reconstruction Agency. So you can imagine the propaganda. In Japan's Fukushima Prefecture, product and tourism are back on their feet more than a decade after triple. Yeah, it's really interesting. They are exporting more food than they did pre-Fukushima meltdowns, all from the nuclear wasteland. And that they got more tourists than they did pre-Fukushima. And the tourists have to eat, so what do you think they're doing with all the radioactive food? As a travel destination and a food product. Just because it's beautiful don't mean it's safe. He said there's 80 farmers you have contact with. Immediately after the earthquake, and he struggled to motivate them, but after proactively testing all the crops, the farmers were reassured by the result and they resumed farming. The food was banned because it is a nuclear wasteland. They picked up 30 million one-ton bags that we know about in these farms. And so that person should be held for crimes against humanity, shouldn't he? Disgusting. You can't smell the radiation or see the radiation or hear the radiation. And Fukushima Update was James Colbert's website post-Fukushima, right? And he let all the apologists post whatever they want there. All the scumbags were posting at Fukushima Update. And then that went dark for a number of years. And then it showed up and it's owned by the Reconstruction Agency of Japan. So in order for them to get the name of that website, they bought it off James Colbert, who claimed that Fukushima was harmless, and let all apologists run his site with the propaganda. And so they had a poll on, remember we done this poll? This was the strangest thing imaginable. Fukushima Update thinks, is that image getting old? So please let us know your gender. I'm a male. I prefer not to answer my age. Let us know the country you live in was Canada. And how much do you think Japan had recovered from the Great Eastern Earthquake after the 11th? Not recovered at all. But look at the options that they had there. How much do you think Japan has recovered from the Great? If you see food in stores that is produced in Fukushima, would you purchase it? So, food produced in Fukushima in eastern Japan, food produced in Japan. These are crazy people. Having gained information from their propaganda, how has your intentions to purchase changed if you saw food? What a bizarre poll they had there. In stores that is produced in Fukushima. I would take it and bring it outside and set it on fire. Having gained information, how is your intentions? So intentions to purchase, I had decreased. But look at the different options that you had. Has not changed. Somewhat increased, the intention to purchase, somewhat decreased. Imagine what kind of freaking monsters you got to be to put a poll like this together. Would you like to visit Fukushima? Why would you want to build a shithole, go to a shithole like Fukushima Prefecture, a nuclear wasteland? Why would you do that to your body and to your loved ones? I would like to visit as a tourist, cannot see it away. I wouldn't like to visit. Of course, you know what I'm going to answer, right? But that's the correct answers. When you see the blue, that's your correct answers. Have gained information. How has your desire to visit Fukushima for tourism changed? It decreased, obviously. Regarding release into the ocean, please let us know which of the following concern you. The impact on human health, marine ecosystem, the atmosphere, the agricultural, forestry, marine products, seawater, marine products in the vicinity of our country, methods of cleaning up the radioactive material, etc., etc., etc. And look at the last one they had there, none of these. And that was their right answer. I gave you the right answers. These are despicable, disgusting public relation firms that do stuff like this. If there was a release into the ocean, would you consider purchasing food? If there was, but the buildings are completely gone. It never stopped hemorrhaging into the ocean on top of that from the China syndrome. If there was a release into the ocean, would you consider purchasing food that is produced in Fukushima Prefecture, Eastern Japan, or Japan? And so they give you the three options. If there was a release in the ocean, would you consider purchasing food? And of course, I gave you the right options. Having gained information is your intention, because they give you propaganda, and then they ask you a question. They give you more propaganda, then they ask you another question, right? And their propaganda is the opposite of what you're supposed to do. I would like, literally, question 13. If there was a release in the ocean, would you want to visit? Now, so this was January, remember. The releases have never stopped, but they're claiming it started on August 24th of this year, the same year. If there is a release in the ocean, would you want to visit? No, I wouldn't want to visit as a tourist. I wouldn't recommend anybody to visit, absolutely. And then they give you more propaganda, and they give you the next question. Have you gained information? Having gained information, how has your intentions? It was really something. It was desperate brainwashing. And I pray that nobody could be that gullible or naive or coerced into from what source do you usually get information such as news? Look how nosy these scumbags are. What source of information do you trust in the Japanese topics? Well, it ain't media. It ain't universities. It ain't government agencies of any country worldwide, period. Statement by Japanese celebrities. Look at the options they give you. My goodness. Statement by celebrities outside your country. So you can see what a celebrity is actually useful for. It's useful to manipulate you and get you sick and destroy your family. I was shocked. Statement by Japanese experts. Statements by Japanese celebrities. Just Japanese social media message boards, announcement by Japanese So these are all organizations you want to avoid, all entities you want to avoid. I have no reliable sources for Japanese. What source of information do you trust in Japanese topics? And so if you answer negative, they're going to block your IP address because you're anti-nuclear. I have no reliable sources for Japanese topics. Thank you very, very much for your time. We'll be sure to block your IP address. The monsters are coming. Fukushima no more, the ghost town lures back former residents and visitors. Former residents. And so we've counted tanks. There's never 1,000 tanks. And the majority of tanks are very small tanks. And so if you actually add up the volume, they're nowhere near the 1.4 million that they claim. Japan's Fukushima decided one of the world's worst nuclear... Well, like, each reactor is 100 Chernobyls. We've never had 4 reactors melt down and 8 fuel pools melt down at the same time. We've never had 2 reactors melt down at the same time. These reactors are pure uranium, pure plutonium, except for reactor 3, which was mixed oxide fuel, which is not even supposed to exist, is so lethal. And that just the normal emissions from these disease factories is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. Nuclear power, yes, nuclear power may be humanity's best hope. No, that's absurd to suggest it. It's not reliable, it's not clean energy, it's the most resource-intensive energy in human history, by the way. 10 best spots to view peach blossoms in Japan. And get yourself some radioactive pollen while you're at it. Don't fall for it. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's a nuclear wasteland. Chernobyl is beautiful too, but it's a nuclear wasteland. Beautiful pictures in a nuclear wasteland. And look at this guy with his kid there. Should be charged with child abuse for taking your kid to a nuclear wasteland. Like breathing it in, guaranteed you're going to get sick from it. Official Sam Brighton allegedly stole suitcases from airports with an S. And he did too. Sam Brighton is a genius. The guy's an actual genius. But he's insane. And he didn't just pick any luggage. And he had tons of money. He was the nuclear guy for the Biden administration. I can't remember which university he went to. He's had a nuclear degree. But he was insane. Going around stealing women's laundry and clothings and luggages is insane. That's insane. He had tons of money. He could have bought his own. And he did, of course. But he had tons of money. It's the nuclear industry, so he had a little bit more than the average administrator did, right? Open a Reactor nuclear power plant likely to be delayed. Of course it is. All nuclear plants are just stupid. They're stupid, eh? The latest tweet by Bloomberg states our worries about nuclear energy are outdated and counterproductive. Outdated? Well, Bloomberg is outdated and counterproductive. Remember what Dwight Eisenhower had told you, in the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex. What he's referring to is United Nations. That is the New World Order, right? 84% of education boards in Japan conduct surveys on school rules amid controversy. Japan's schools restrict hair, underwear color, and dating. You're what? You're restricting children's underwear colors. What are you doing looking at their underwear, scumbags? Honey, I sold the kids. Japan will start paying families $6,000 per child to move out of Tokyo. Yeah, to move into Fukushima nuclear meltdown. You got to stay there for 5 years. Nuclear plant faces shutdown. These are murderers. That's what the nuclear industry destroyed all governments that they have infiltrated, which is the majority of the planet. All the universities, all the media completely corrupted by the secrecy of the nuclear industry all the way back to the Manhattan Project. And they spy on all these journalists too. There's a huge industry of spies Nuclear plant faces shutdown over attacks on windfalls. EDF warns may be forced to shut 2 nuclear disease factories in the United Kingdom. So imagine that you got a foreign entity controlling the power in your country. Just could you ever be that stupid to let something like that happen? How could you be that complacent? Well, that's what the industry does. UK plans a fleet of small nuclear reactors to fight the energy crisis. The Rolls-Royce small modular reactors are the furthest things from being small. They're half the size of a large reactor. My apologies for my gargling. I'll just try to remember to turn the volume down for you guys so you don't have to listen to that noise. UK plans a fleet of small modular reactors. They don't have any applications into the regulatory agencies, which means they're 30 years away from fruition, at least. And so why not come up with solutions? Right? Why not come up with solutions? And it's surrounded by farms, of course. You can't call it green and you can't call it power. Shelling damages, speaking of farms, shelling damages backup power line at Zaporizhzhia nuclear disease factory in Ukraine. So this is looking across at the Ukraine plant. And if I go up in a drone way up in the air, this is what it looks like. So right across from the nuclear disease factory, also known as a nuclear power plant, as usual, is massive farms. It's ridiculous how often we see this. Almost every single plant has those particular attributes. Solar power can offer a superior alternative to nuclear fission for generating oxygen on the moon. Yeah, why would you want to bring nuclear into space when it doesn't exist in the space? We call it man-made, and the nuclearproctologist.org is a think tank. And we advocate no anthropogenic man-made nuclear in space because it's not natural. And we can't predict how much harm this could cause space. And of course, there's not all rockets make it into space. A lot of them blow up, right? And then you contaminate the whole planet with even more nuclear fallout. Howard, a minister, considers extinguishing native titles over South Australia's site earmarked for nuclear waste dump. So they were going to take away the rights of the natives so they can take their land to turn it into a medical nuclear waste dump. So the medical waste that they stick in your loved ones and kill them, that same waste has to go into a deep geological repository. And we should all be ashamed of ourselves that we let this industry murder us in our hospitals. A decade-long battle to create a national storage site for Australia. Well, when did they put it in a place that's not prime farmland? It's because they always pick prime farmland as where they get into all the issues. And you know there's going to be a blowback. And so they're not trying to come up with a solution because they put it in a place where you know there's going to be great resistance. And then they go in and divide the towns. It's like the Nuclear Waste Management Organization in Canada. The first thing they done when they got into this big area was bought 1,600 acres of prime farmland, and they want the farmers to keep farming it for 100 years while they're putting stuff in the repository, because everything is repackaged at these so-called geological repository sites, which means everything is vented on the way there, and then everything is repackaged. So you're releasing huge radiation before it goes underground. And everything underground is vented for the first 100 years. And so they throw all kinds of money, ridiculous amount of money into the surrounding communities that are impoverished. And you're just giving them money. They're just like, no, there's no commitment. We want to help you. Here's a couple of million. Give me a call more. I got some more for you. France's nuclear headache leaves Macron on the brink of rationing electricities. At one point, they had 30 of their reactors broken down. They were taking power from all around them that didn't have power to spare in the first place. Now they're claiming they're going to build 6 reactors. They don't have the supply network. They don't have the manpower. It's 100% posturing. This and all of their farms are surrounded, all of their reactors are surrounded by farms, including their reprocessing facilities like La Hague, which also has over 500 security guards. This legend stems from Operation Plum Bob, a series of nuclear tests conducted in 1957. There was a war, right? Operation Plum Bob was a nuclear war where they set off all these. Instead of Russia throwing nuclear weapons at you, the Americans like, that's okay. We'll just blow up our own nuclear weapons and poison all the land and water and people. That's what happened, right? That's what nuclear war is. The same weapons with the same radioactive fallout. Cape Cod salties hold a forum on Holtec, planned to dump radioactive water into Cape Cod. That's Krish Singh's baby, is Holtec. And they claim they go in and decommission a nuclear reactor in 12 years, but it takes everybody else 60 years. And Holtec makes their profits on the money left over from decommissioning. So they're not paid to go decommissioning. They're given the money for decommissioning, and they got to cut every corner imaginable to make a profit. And this is how they're doing it. So it's not about coming up with solutions. It's about manipulating you into looking somewhere else why this is going on. And this is a fatal mistake for humanity and the 8 million species. Hence the reason we got a poll tonight. Are the pro-nuclear destroying Earth and its 8 million species with endless radioactive fallout? We got 100% acknowledgement. Yeah. So they got another guy takes over the reins of the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board. These are the worst of the worst people. Every country that has a regulatory board, these are actual demons, and we've covered pretty well every country on the planet many times, and particularly the regulatory agencies, who are the only ones that are allowed to make it illegal to poison you with radiation, because currently it's not illegal to poison you with radiation. It's not illegal to poison you and your loved ones and your communities and your drinking water and your farmlands with radiation. It's not illegal. Algerian president says France must get rid of its colonizer complex. Well, Algeria, they set off all kinds of nuclear weapons, and then they buried the nuclear waste in the Sahara Desert. They caused a civil war there, still going on today, in order to get their hands on resources. The one thing we know is nuclear is not your friend. New investment in natural gas and nuclear power has long been taboo since Fukushima, and fossil investments were officially banned at the Climate Summit in Constipated Priority 26, COP26, just a year ago. It was banned. So the United Nations doesn't have any authority. It's a corporation. But it's able to ban whatever it wants worldwide. But it's just a corporation. Do you get what they're doing to you? They've taken over your country. When you follow United Nations protocols, that means they've taken over your country. You don't need United Nations to tell you what to do. You need to get rid of. You need to hold United Nations accountable for all the genocides it's created, including North Korea. Nuclear power plant goes into short standstill. Well, look at that. Gee, what's that in the background? That can't be farms. Nobody would put a nuclear power plant in farmlands. Tell me there's nobody that stupid on the planet. Wait a second. Oh my God, that looks like farms. Only nuclear would be that scumbaggery. Nuclear got a special knack at being scumbags, I noticed, didn't it? Total coincidence that every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms. U.S. nuclear envoys revival As public and private funding pours in, U.S. nuclear enjoys a revival. As public and private funds. Like, why would the public and private funds invest in disease factories for? Especially old, decrepit ones that are brittle after decades spent out of favor. These are, all of this, that's 2022. Obviously, these headlines are all January. So we've done 20 shows in January, typically 2 hours each show. We're just going to run through the headlines the best we can. We're going to do the same thing all the way up until New Year's Day. And just see if we can do a crash course on what happened in 2023, which is a ridiculous amount of work for me. But I think it's really important because this goes down the black hole if we don't revisit it and put it into perspective for 2024, right? Chalk River Laboratory, which is the government, is run by contractors but owned by the Canadian government. It's the first nuclear meltdown that we know about worldwide, and they had two. One of them, they have I can't remember the name. They basically cemented it in place, which means it's the stupidest thing you could possibly do. You can't call nuclear carbon-free. Nuclear got nothing to do with carbon-free. And Nick Hawker, co-founder of the first light fusion, considered one of the leading scientists in the area. And you notice how they use the word carbon-free for everything to do with nuclear? It's desperate. It's really pathetic, actually. They're so desperate for you to believe them and trust them. So Canadian Chalk River National Laboratory, the massive disease factory and which that river runs all the way down past Ottawa and Pembroke, Ottawa, and also runs down here into the St. Lawrence, comes right down past my door. And it also trickles over to the major freshwater reservoirs for the North America continent. That's the third biggest one on the planet of fresh water. You got a lot of nuclear plants, American and Canadian, on these lakes. It's absurd that we would do something like that. That's contempt for beautiful water. This, the most precious resource we got is water. We should protect it with every fiber in our body. How safe is the Ottawa River from nuclear waste? You got endless nuclear reactors hemorrhaging. You even got meltdowns at a sodium reactor melted down, I think, Lake Erie or Lake Huron in the American side. The Canadians have had major... The Canadian reactors have major dumps. And the Canadian reactors dump so much tritium. Just a single reactor in Canada probably releases more tritium than all the nuclear reactors worldwide. The CANDU reactors are a curse to humanity. British mini nuclear reactor firm plans $1 billion fundraiser. A mini nuclear reactor with they don't have an application into the regulatory agency. They don't have a license application into the regulatory agency. They don't have a site to build it on. They don't have nothing, basically. And they get $1 billion. Anything that will destroy humanity gets whatever money and 99% of that goes to administration because they don't have any reactors or anything to waste money on, see? Plan for a lead-cooled reactor fueled by waste derived from existing. So this is a mixed oxide fuel. And because like when you take the mixed oxide fuel out and you have to store it after 18 months, the emissions from a mixed oxide reactor's fuel, because they're still splitting atoms for millions of years, is so lethal by the atom, it's hard to comprehend. Like you say, a normal reactor's emissions are 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. But a mixed oxide fuel reactor like these disease factories that they're talking about, their emissions are 2 billion times 2 billion more toxic than industrial poison. It's a blight on all of humanity. Can't have a future and nuclear. Defense Ministry warns any North Korean nuclear use attempt would result in Kim's regime end. Any North Korean nuclear use attempt. Well, first off, the Americans, this is South Korea, the Americans got nuclear weapons all around North Korea. Right? The reason North Korea is the bad guy is because that was United Nations Army's first exploit in the genocide. They called it a police action. You got millions dead, millions missing, millions in refugee camps, millions unaccounted for, millions of orphans. You destroyed all the infrastructure. You burnt down every community, every city in the entire country with napalm. The United Nations did. And for 70 years now, it's been isolated and ostracized, and land, sea, and air embargoes. And it's used now to justify billions and billions and billions of dollars in expenditures, as if somehow North Korea was a threat. America has 900 bases worldwide. That's how many countries they're attacking. North Korea's not attacking anybody. They're just trying to defend themselves. And the only reason they have these programs is because they have no choice. They're under siege 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And it's collective punishment. Nobody in the country can leave the country with these embargoes. Now, all the media spends all the time, spare time it got, demonizing North Korea. Gonna get you. Which is a ludicrous assertion. Lawmakers slam International Atomic Energy Agency's political approach. The International Atomic Energy Agency is asserting that nothing whatsoever got out of Fukushima reactors. So the official story from the International Atomic Energy Agency is nothing got out of these buildings. So what's the point of the International Atomic Energy Agency, which, by the way, is not a regulatory agency. It doesn't have any authority, any sovereignty over any country. Lake's college graduate presents a paper to the International Conference. And Jacobs, if you look at Jacobs' legacy, it's humiliating. They exist. Wireless air monitoring systems. Ready to face a room full of nuclear experts, I mean. She's all proud of herself being a monster. Look at her. Oh, I'm a pretty monster. Look at me, everybody. The National College for Nuclear at Lakes College. National College for Nuclear. So if you ever want to do protests, there's a good spot to start. Rokinshaw reprocessing plant completion delayed again. And this is in Japan. This is like they've been building this place for 29 years. Now the date has moved from 2022 to 2024. But I know they moved it up again there last month or something, right? They're supposed to reproach Japan's fuel. They already have what they were doing, they were sending their fuel to Britain, to Sellafield, and also to La Hague in France to be reprocessed. Then it gets shipped, the plutonium and the fuel left over gets shipped back to them. And remember, those facilities are surrounded by farms in France and the United Kingdom. There's unbelievable emissions from these disease factories. And just those two, like the Sellafield, the Donerae in Scotland, which is UK's, and La Hague in France, we've done entire presentations at academic studies showing that they contaminated the Arctic alone, just them. Not counting all the other ridiculous stuff that was done to the Arctics. But the emissions from these and where it ends up to quantifies those assertions. Bomb cyclone storm causes tense moments at David Bessie's nuclear disease factory. So there's a real possibility if you destroy the power, then the generators can't start, and so it'll melt down on you. If you have a carrying event, if you have a EMP event, electric magnetic pulse event from the sun, you can take out all the nuclear power plants at one time. They'll all melt down, and the fuel pools within a couple of weeks. It'll all be melting down worldwide, and then nothing could walk on this planet for 1 billion years. The Non-Regulatory Commission, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, refers to Lake Erie as the ultimate heat sink. Lake Erie is one of the biggest aquifers of fresh water on the entire planet, folks. Why are we destroying our fresh water? We can't have anything without fresh water. These things should never, under any circumstances, been allowed near fresh water for starters, let alone to exist, but certainly not near fresh water. First Energy fined $3.9 million in scandal involving a nuke plant. $3.9 million. How much did they steal? $2 billion or something? NATO involved in Ukraine must not be off the table in 2023. What are you talking about? This is a proxy war. NATO's supplying the weapons. NATO countries are supplying the weapons to whatever that creature is, Zelensky. All the weapons he's using are from NATO countries. That's a proxy war. Editorial, credible nuclear regulations need independent transparency. Credible. You can't, there's no way you can have a credible nuclear regulation organization. You just can't do it. The corruption is absolute. Every university, every media on the planet is 100% corrupted by this despicable genocide machine, omnicide machine. Lithuania had nuclear plant to be dismantled by U.S. engineers. So you shouldn't be allowed to build nuclear plants if you can't decommission them yourself. And what do you see in front of the plant? Farmland. Russia has taken of Ukraine nuclear plant to hit the clean energy future, says Holtec. What? Holtec is making us profit by skimping out on the cleanup for nuclear reactors. The only way they can make a profit is if they release stupid amount of radiation into your environment. And then recycle nuclear material back into the environment too. Nuclear industry loves it. They love him. Chris Singh, they love that guy to pieces. Dr. Chris Singh, the despicable, disgusting, heartless, soulless monster, is his legacy. Copenhagen Atomics put forward small modular reactor design for UK appraisal. Copenhagen Atomics. So they take the name of the country and smear the country by doing that and attaching it to something as evil as atomics. And then they're trying to, because they're only using those names, combinations, to try to give themselves some street creds, right? And anything that you read at the World Nuclear News is 100% propaganda. That's why you'll never see their names on the stories. Go through all their stories, you won't find a single name on it. A subsidy of Denmark's Copenhagen Atomics has submitted a generic design assessment for thorium molten salt reactors, UK Department of Business, Energy, Industrial Strategies. So they blow this absurd money, this absurd amount of money in every direction, right? But yet geothermal's right there. It's ready to go. It's a piece of cake. It's only $5 million per megawatt, so it's infinitely cheaper. It's never going to be 10 years or 5 years or 1 year behind schedule. It's never going to go over budget. It's never going to be toxic. You're never going to have to worry about putting 100 sirens within a 10-mile radius of your geothermal plants. You're never going to have to practice evacuating the entire cities in case it breaks down. Pandora's box of nuclear progress. Pandora's box of nuclear there is no nuclear progress. While uranium mining, nuclear engineering, and atomic bombs are all steps in the path to distraction. Oh, well, we release so much into the environment, we have essentially condemned our species and our planet, which is why we got a great poll to help articulate that tonight. Are the pro-nuclear destroying Earth and its 8 million species with endless radioactive fallout? Duh, of course it is, Dana. Fukushima town near Fukushima nuclear plant site holds a ceremony for 20-year-olds. Fukushima is within sight of ongoing multiple nuclear meltdowns. Fukushima is joined on the hip to the nuclear plant itself, and Fukushima has been abandoned that entire time. So why would you bring children into a nuclear wasteland where it's impossible not to breathe in? And the clothes they're wearing, they should throw it away immediately. They should cut all their hair off immediately. They should try to detox their body immediately. They should dehydrate to try to excrete as much radiation as they can immediately. So there's a whole different kind of evil where you bring in the most vulnerable and promising of society, the graduates, and yet the most vulnerable because you don't understand the danger. And you bring them into a nuclear wasteland so you can get your pictures and pretend that Fukushima is not a nuclear wasteland. Cause this, like, to pretend something like that is a whole different level of scumbag. It's unbelievable that somebody can be that. Successful Cecilia. Who is Cecilia Vega? Well, Cecilia Vega, when she worked for ABC Australia, that's her in the corner, pretending she's in the nuclear meltdown fuel pool that doesn't exist 100 feet above the wreckage. She makes almost $1 million a year being a monster, and she's currently in the White House press club for CBS. She got a promotion because she's such a great scumbag. But like, she looks like a normal, wonderful person, don't you? Look at her, very pretty. Right? Beautiful smile. Got $1 million budget each year, or paycheck each year. Her job is to cut your throat. So be careful who you trust. Fukushima maintains safety measures after 2011 earthquake. Safety measures? What are you talking about? Safety measures. See the little Geiger counter? Just one community has 3,000 of these fake Geiger counters to trick people into staying there. And it worked. And everybody knows every house there is entitled to be decontaminated, which you can't do with nuclear. Think about how evil you are when you, rather than give anybody money because you destroyed their farms and everything else, you take the money and buy 3,000 Geiger counters, put it in the community so you can have 300,000 lab rats. Nationalized the Fukushima Daiichi atomic plant. That was a study from 2011, 14th of December. Only by bringing the nuclear power stations into government hands can scientists find out what really happened. First off, it was nationalized right away, right? Because TEPCO went bankrupt right away, the government had to take it over. It was nationalized. They kept the name TEPCO so you wouldn't start screaming nuclear scumbag industry. So you put all your blame on this corporation that if the heat was intense, they can just go bankrupt, right? And just fade away. And the nuclear industry, well, we're sorry, that should never happen. We're here to fix everything. And the same old happens. Port Hope Area Initiative project is the focus of a special council meeting. At Port Hope, of course, they had one of the biggest mining disaster of uranium that is contaminated. And then the tailings were used to build schools and sidewalks and foundations for family homes. It's disgusting. And it was a total human guinea pig experiment is what they done with that community. Cedar pollen volume hits 10-year high in parts of Japan. So you got to worry about radioactive pollen. It's hard to appreciate it, but you're talking, say, thousands of pollen in a cubic meter of air that is radioactive. It's a very dangerous thing now. And have you ever seen cedar pollen when it releases this pollen? It looks like clouds hanging around the forest, right? That's actually pollen. So it's a serious threat to your drinking water, to your ecosystem, and to the species dependent upon pollen, like the bees and moths and stuff like that. Southern Utah's featured Downwind documentary premiering at the Slam Dance Film Festival. Yeah, you heard me right. Slam dance, not sun dance, but the slam dance. And the map that they're depicting is each one of those marks is made by 2 nuclear weapons tests, and that's the radioactive fallout. But the radioactive fallout now we know is totally different looking than that. That's a very old model. But they radiated the entire country so Russia wouldn't, because they were worried Russia would radiate the entire country. And so the people in the fallout, there's all kinds of illnesses and diseases, heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, and later on Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome. In fact, autism and Down syndrome is one of the first studies produced after nuclear accidents. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Mercury, Nevada, downwind. Well, let me give you a model of how the fallout really... See, a nuclear accident is a worldwide event. It's not isolated to just a continent or village or city. Because of how radioactive fallout dispersal works, it's well understood in the community, but it's not for the average person. So 27 days of radioactive fallout is the bottom model covering the entire planet. That's the consensus of the majority of the depictions of the radioactive fallout. Environment Minister Myers confirms a phase out of nuclear power in mid-April. It's Germany, yeah, because Germany phased out all their power, right? Nuclear power. The problem with nuclear energy advocates, they're insane. They're actually insane. Like this creature right here, Rafael Grossi. Modern North Korea's nukes activities. Like he's telling everybody that the reactors didn't melt down, for goodness sakes. He's saying nothing got out of the buildings that don't even exist anymore. Right? He's saying nothing got out. Look at it. You think anything never got out? The moon beckons once again, and this time NASA wants to stay. Is there any evidence that proves they were to the moon? How come they haven't gone back in over 40 years? How come other countries are not up there, you know? We allegedly sent rockets to catch up with meteorites traveling at 50,000 miles an hour and get samples to bring back to Earth, but we don't go to the moon, where there's endless meteorites have pounded into it for millions of years, billions of years? Why wouldn't we go up there first? Why would you go to a space station rather than a moon base? Because nothing's allowed to make sense, right? Belgium agrees with NGs to extend the life of 2 nuclear reactors by 10 years. Because they can't build new reactors. I mean, you know, they got EDF is building reactors. Rosatom in Russia is building reactors. But they can't build endless reactors. They can just build a few. And they're guaranteed to be 3 or 4 times over budget. And they're guaranteed to have lifelong problems. And they're guaranteed to hemorrhage radiation into the environment. And there is no way to contain it once you take it out of the reactor core. There's no longer a containment. So it's still splitting atoms into the environment from all the fuel pools. It's still hemorrhaging the same radiation, the same atoms as it needed to boil water for 1 million homes. When that comes out of the reactor core, there's no containment. So it's still splitting atoms into the environment. Where do you really think that stuff's going? Why do you think it's surrounded by, the majority of nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms? We got to keep rolling because we got a lot of these to get through. We're getting through January's headlines. But think about compressed air storage, because the simple way is just dig mine shafts and compressed air down into the mine shafts. Instant storage. And you can buy windmills that's all they do is compress air. It's unbelievably simple technology. It's ridiculous. It's off the shelf. Anybody can build it for their own property on top of that. Nuclear energy, who better to ask than Japan? Obviously, this is Australia. And Australia, the nuclear industry in Australia is bizarre. They really are bizarre, right? And a previous administration had made it illegal to have reactors in Australia because they recognized that they had the IQ of 11-year-olds in the nuclear industry average. High probability of successive occurrences at the Nankai megathrust earthquake. First off, Japan. Why did Japan build the Nami reactors, the Fukushima reactors, on a fault line where you have 1,000 earthquakes a year and a 3,000-year legacy of tsunamis over 300 feet high? Why would you do that? Why would you do that unless you were hoping to have a nuclear event and you knew the winds buried North America in radioactive fallout? And why did Japan use the design with their fuel pools at the top of the buildings, where if you have an event, you can't get near the fuel pools? So you got 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures below the fuel pools. What do you think is going to happen? Mr. Harris Goes to Paris producer, Super B film, Nabs Write the Book series unveils. Oh, it don't matter. I can't remember. I'm surprised I remember any of these stories with how much information we pump out each year. It's absurd. And each year it gets even more, right? Meet the renewable energy source poised for growth with the help of the oil industry. Yeah, what is it, I wonder? Well, like all nuclear power plants need 2 gas, oil, coal plants to run it. 2 large ones that you would use in a city, dedicated to the nuclear site to build it, to run it for its lifetime, and then to be there to decommission it for 60 years. So they call it nuclear resource free. They call it carbon free, but how can you have something carbon free? And what the hell is wrong with carbon? Carbon doesn't make plumes that covers the planet. The only thing that does that is nuclear. Microwave drilling sounds like science fiction, but so does drilling down to the hottest rocks. Well, geothermal is what they're talking about. And microwave drilling, there's other techniques they're using for geothermal. So one of them is where they're mass producing now drill rigs, which is 25,000 psi water jets. So it slices up the rocks as it's drilling down. And then it has pneumatic hammers that pound the rocks apart. And then the drill bit goes through it after that. So they're going to be 4 or 5 or 6 times more quicker than a conventional drilling rig. Geothermal is so simple. It's so... Imagine if you took say 100 universities to come up with a mass production of... The only issue you got is the drill bits, right? There's a $50 billion market over next number of years for just drill bits for geothermal. Because the deeper you go, the harder the rocks are, right? And so you can use, like you say, the techniques is use microwave to evaporate the rocks, or lasers, or technology like that. Or pneumatic, like 25,000 psi water jets to split the rocks to make it easier for the drill bits to penetrate it. But all you got to do is come up. The universities are all focused on fusion, which won't exist for hundreds of years probably. Right, so all our resources, and I'm not kidding you when I say that, by the way, all our resources are gobbled up by the nuclear industry. They don't want a solution because then they don't have a place anymore. And so they have scuttled the efforts of humanity to have any kind of future. And their emissions have guaranteed we're not going to have a future, which is one of the reasons we got this poll tonight, to help articulate that. Are the pro-nuclear destroying Earth's and its 8 million species with endless radioactive fallout? Do we have energy to run future technologies? I hope it don't look like that. German minister, well, we do. We got geothermal. Like wind and solar, you should back it up with compressed air storage or water batteries, where you have 2 reservoirs and you pump water up. to the top one with excess energy. But ideally, you would use both of them with wind and solar. And then all of that, is, of course, is first you use geothermal, and then you use wind and solar, and then the compressed storage, air storage, and water batteries can both be used for lulls in the cycle, right, where just geothermal's running, and for peak power, which is only 6 hours a day, right? German ministers reignite coalitions will call to review nuclear exit. And so the pro-nuclear industry in Germany tried every dirty trick in the book to keep Germany's nuclear power plants up. They were supported by the nuclear industry worldwide too. And thank goodness they failed. Nuclear power catching the eyes of Silicon Valley tech billionaires for clean energy alternatives. What they're talking about, though, is fusion. And so we had these tech billionaires. This was just a write-off for their companies. That's all. They invested, huge monies in the fusion sector that they know they're not going to crack, but it's a write-off anyway. And the idea was to promote that fable and then hope that people bought into it. That was artificial renaissance, so to speak, right? And they've done this many times. They do it every year or every 2 years anyway. But that's basically what that added up to. The left's never-ending campaign to banish those who questions its narrative. Oh, well, like, YouTube is a bunch of subjects you're not allowed to talk about. The United Nations will ban you, right? You simply can't talk about it. Or you can't say that. The United Nations said this. You've got to say what the United Nations said. You can't say something else. And they'll ban you. They'll block you. I got blocked recently for 7 days because I didn't agree with United Nations. United Nations blocked me because I didn't agree with them. Being pro-nuclear won't be enough. Here's why. Being pro-nuclear won't be enough. What, are you going to be, a fanatic? They got to go out and beat up anti-nuclears or something? The future remains uncertain for nuclear energy. Nuclear energy shouldn't have existed. It has no attributes that further humanity and the 8 million species. It destroys it. It's the opposite of something decent. United Kingdom eyes nuclear power growth and launches a $90 million nuclear fuel fund. Like, $90 million in the nuclear industry is literally nothing. Because 90% of it gets stolen for administration, right? So it's all about administration. It's got nothing to do with coming up with infrastructure. And that is so obvious, and so blatant, that anybody who denies it is simply a denialist. You're just simply refusing to be realistic. And $90 million is nothing in the nuclear industry. There's nothing. They can't produce a single thing for $90 million. There's nothing they can produce. A lot of punch cards for the... But they won't produce anything tangible. Nuclear power saw multiple gains in 2022, which is simply ludicrous to suggest. But economics and other questions remain. What do you mean multiple gains? Like, what are you really talking about? This year, there's 440 gigawatts of renewables came online in 12 months. Nuclear, to get 365 watts, or gigawatts, took 80 years. Renewable done almost 100 gigawatts more in 12 months than the entire nuclear fleet combined. That's going to double year after year from here on out, right? No, nuclear is drowning and it's trying to take everybody down with it. First Energy agrees to pay $3.9 million for failing to tell Fern about the energy bill bribery payments. Of course, you should get a criminal record. Because you're just going to go do it somewhere else, right? That's how it works. If there's no incentive not to be evil, guess what happens? Analyst shows U.S. wind and solar could outpace coal and nuclear in 2023. It could outpace coal and nuclear. It was 440 gigawatts this year alone. Last year was 390 gigawatts. And the year before was 330 gigawatts. That's 1,000 gigawatts in 3 years. It's a ridiculous amount of energy. That's the equivalent of that's the equivalent of around 1,400 large nuclear power plants coming online in 3 years. How can you do that as a comparison, see? And they're scuttling the storage. That's the only thing that's stopping the world from coming alive and waking up to the reality. But I mean, why wouldn't you use geothermal? How come geothermal is not the dominant energy when it's absolutely under everybody's feet? There's 2 billion times more energy under your feet than the entire world needs. And that's accessible easily. But as the technology gets better over the next 3 and 4 years, there's no limit, right? NND applies for license for Norwegian nuclear decommissioning for a license to own and operate 3 nuclear facilities. Like they're trying, they're posturing, but the majority of it falls apart is what we can prove unequivocally. Why did Portland General Electric want to build a Trojan nuclear plant in the first place? Yeah, the Portland nuclear industry up in Portland, they're vicious. They're just they suck the life out of humanity, those people. Many nuclear reactors could soon power data centers. Google's data center is not nuclear, it's geothermal. That just came online because it's realistic. Researchers team up to visualize radiation with virtual reality. Virtual reality, you see? Again, I'm so suspicious of anything from universities, and because we're forced to be suspicious of them, they don't have any attributes that says, well, we can trust them. Does anybody know anybody in the nuclear industry that you feel you can trust? Anybody know anybody in the media you feel you can trust? Well, guess again, because the entire media worldwide pretended they were in the fuel pools. And if they weren't there doing it themselves, pretending at a nuclear plant in the United States that they were in Japan, they were regurgitating the stories. Bulgaria signs a nuclear fuel deal with Framatome, which is French, was previously called Areva, I believe, was it? Because they've had so many of them, they went bankrupt to get away from their obligations for the next million years. Japan's nuclear restart hit by engineer and manufacturing capacity shortages. And we talked about that earlier, where they don't have the manpower, they don't have the supply. They don't have the supply lines. They don't have the supply chains. There's 1 million corporations necessary to build a nuclear power plant, and it's not something you can just rebuild overnight or over 5 or 10 years. It takes a long time to put this whole thing together. So Japan's nuclear restart, these plants have been closed for a decade, for goodness sakes. And they've been hemorrhaging radiation into an environment from the fuel pools the entire time. When I say hemorrhaging, it's hard to comprehend what I actually mean. It's way worse than that word. Energy experts come full circle on nuclear power. Yeah, but that's posturing. Renewables curb stomped them the last 3 years in a row now. Major nuclear power mishaps, and I curb stomped them by producing more electricity than all nuclear combined each year. That's curb stomping it. Right? That's curb stomping. Major nuclear power mishap in 35 countries since 1990. Like the countries that are using nuclear have been dumping their nuclear waste everywhere. Let me give you an idea of quite a few countries were doing this one routine for about 30 years. Britain was the most egregious, but not the only one by far. Britain had a couple of special ships, cargo ships, and every couple of a week or so they would go into port, load up with 45-gallon drums of nuclear waste, and then they would hit it on the sea again, on the continental shelf itself, in fairly shallow water, and dump the barrels overboard without, not like they're dumping it all in one place. They would just drive along the continental shelf throwing it overboard. This is the nursery for the Atlantic Ocean we're talking about. All oceans are connected on top of that. And they're dumping 45-gallon drums overboard for 30 years. High-level waste, because there was no rules, no regulations. And when these barrels sink, they're every 33 feet, they're under almost 15 pounds per square inch extra of compression, right? So 15 pounds per square inch. They get down to 66 feet, it's 30 pounds per square inch. A 45-gallon drum will crumble at around 35, 40 pounds per square inch. So they were releasing the radiation into the ocean nonstop for 30 years, legally, because there was no checks and balances and no incentive not to be evil. And this is why you see the death of the oceans leading up to Fukushima, which was a pulse event. It lost so much inventories at Fukushima, dwarfs all nuclear accidents combined for each reactor. Super straight jet stream will cause localized weather chaos worldwide. Super straight jet stream. You had a jet stream that never done this before. And so when you look at the incredible cyclones and typhoons and hurricanes and jet streams and abnormalities, you go back about 12 years to Fukushima, and that's when you see this incredible disparity of wind speeds and storms and intensity and longevities and enormity. Like these storms we're seeing are 700-800 miles wide, typhoons and cyclones and hurricanes. Instead of coming to the coastlines and slowing down and become tropical storms, they don't lose any power. They just grind on the coastline until they chew all of that up and slowly work their way. And then they leave the continent and go to another continent with super intensity. Some of these storms have lasted for several hundred days, something unheard of pre-Fukushima. These are supercell storms caused by an event in 2011. You can trace this right back to post-2011. Green surge and circuit breaker on nuclear revival. Green surge is a circuit breaker on a nuclear revival. Well, it's being held back, right? The green energy transition. Canada last year closed 700 wind and solar farms in Ontario. Huge facilities. They closed them all. They took away any kind of government help. And there was $4.5 billion allocated so the solar and wind farms could build their own storage energies. And so they took that money and gave it to Bruce Power nuclear plants. And Bruce is going to use it to build a hydroelectric, a storage for their nuclear power plant that they don't need. So rather than have the renewables finally come to fruition here in Canada, the Canadian pro-nuclear government of Ontario, which is 100% pro-nuclear and despicably so, scuttled the renewable industry and gave the money for storage to a nuclear power plant which doesn't need storage. And that's a slap in your face to do what they've done. International Atomic Energy Agency brings nuclear law to universities. How is it that a corporation that has no sovereignty, is not a regulatory agency or anything like that, in any country worldwide, is able to influence our universities? And the only people that will get those degrees is the pro-nuclear inbreeds, little mongrelized children themselves. Samsung advances plans for floating offshore nuclear plant. Yeah, like we see a lot of that posturing. Some of it might come to fruition, but it's going to get overshadowed by the renewable revolution. There's so many other renewables we don't really touch on, but we have. Like we've covered it, but we don't keep bringing it to the forefront, which is a mistake. And I apologize for that, but I'm kind of overwhelmed every day. Samsung advances plans for floating offshore nuclear plant. These are floating Chernobyls. The releases from these floating disease factories is astronomical, by the way. She spent a decade fighting to ban nuclear weapons, and the stakes are only getting higher. Not her. Well, bless her heart, and I should have got... You got to realize when I'm trying to put this together tonight, I got 20 shows, and you have to import everything and just grab all the headlines and try to run through the headlines, which is not looking good, I must admit, right here. Ukraine plant must be seized from Russia. How are you going to seize a nuclear plant from Russia in Ukraine? How's that work, I wonder? What's in a small modular reactor? It's like a unicorn, only more rarer. What's in a small modular reactor? Canada's bet on the contentious next generation tech to explain. There is no next tech. There is no. They don't even have a license into the regulatory agency. It's a non-conversation. Why are we talking about it? You're delaying coming up with solutions by even uttering the word small modular reactors. Los Alamos National Laboratory record $4.6 billion budget will still mostly fund nuclear weapons. Youngskin, which is a senator of the United States, nuclear initiative would make Virginia an energy innovator. An energy innovator. Again, that's a fable because they talk about the small modular reactors. And whenever you see these pictures of nuclear power plants in the background, that are farms in the background, that blows me away. And UK faces blackout threat if more plants are taken offline. Well, see, they had the money, they had the monetary, they had the authority, they had the manpower to build an alternative energy, but they refused to build an alternative to the nuclear. And so when nuclear finally reached its lifespan, rather than take it offline, give it a proper sending off, they said, well, we can't turn it off. We don't got nothing to replace it. Because the people that you put in charge to replace the energy didn't do it, so you couldn't get rid of it. And we see that happening worldwide symmetrically now for at least the last 7-8 years. Support for nuclear energy growing in Europe. Again, this is not backed up by... There's nobody out there screaming for nuclear power. Like, it's just a pro-nuclear community that's making a living off it. That's the only ones. There's no revolution, there's no renaissance, rather, in the communities. There's no communities out there like, well, I don't know why they're not using nuclear power. It's not happening. It's never going to happen on top of that. Right? They live in a fantasy world, a real-life fantasy. Tap into the legacy fund for nuclear plant, said the letter. The upcoming North Dakota legislative session should use money out of the legacy fund to build a nuclear power plant. Well, you know this is the nuclear industry. So wait, what? They got money stuck away? Let's put out this article and see if we can get some meat behind it. Now, the whole industry is 100% corrupt, unfortunately. Japan to use self-defense forces to guard nuclear power plants. Well, you're going to use them for the coal plants, the oil plants, gas plants, data? No, just nuclear. Nuclear is the only thing out there that can destroy your country and your planet. The most dangerous thing on the planet is a nuclear power plant. It doesn't need to melt down to poison you. It's got that already worked out. Nuclear already got that sorted out a long time ago. That's why all nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms. It's not an accident that every nuclear power plant, except for a couple, which are usually deep in cities, which is the same thing, because they know you're going to eat the food. They're going to make sure of it. That's why they build them in these fertile farmlands. ERGRID chief says a role for nuclear energy deserves a deep interrogation. Yeah, well, let's put Dana in this equation. I'll interrogate him for you. If you need someone to go to court to beat the nuclear industry up, pick me. There's no way the nuclear industry is going to win. Mark Foley says he thinks the possibility of nuclear energy reactors in Ireland should be explored. He'll say whatever the lobbyists tell him to say, right? As soon as you see someone who looks like that there, you know that's a bad person. Russia's nuclear industry looks to robots. Well, like you've had accidents since the 50s, catastrophic events, I should say, since the 50s, and you haven't come up with solutions? And this is Nuclear Engineering International, which is a pro-nuclear lobbying group disguised as a media. Nuclear plant sirens. You know why they got sirens around nuclear power plants? Because it's Chernobyl, right? So as soon as a nuclear power plant starts up, or when they first take the fuel out of the reactor, for instance, the siren should go off all day, every day for the rest of our lives. Because once it goes in the fuel pool, it's hemorrhaging radiation. And they got that covered. They're surrounded by farms because they love you so much. They're hoping to turn you into Spider-Man and the Hulk and Superman and Batwoman and all the other crazy fake superheroes they concocted. Japan's Prime Minister Kishida vows to take initiative in tackling global issues. There's nothing that these puppets won't save. They don't even say that. Someone wrote the media in a public relations firm and said, oh, put this up there because he's so stupid he can't say anything. Don't go interviewing him. John LaForge, said to be the first U.S. activist jailed in Germany for protesting nuclear weapons, right? I sent him pictures of the reactors and he said there was no evidence the fuel pools were harmed. I sent him pictures of and that clearly shows the fuel pools were gone. He emailed me back. There's no evidence. He said, I see no evidence that fuel pools are gone. Today, 18 peace activists from different countries, USA, Netherlands, Great Britain, Germany, so these people like to co-op movements. Look at Arnie Gunnarsson and Helen Caldicott if you really want to see how the scumbags actually work. They infiltrated almost all the anti-nuclear movements out there. They almost squeezed into this one, but we crushed them. B-52 crashed in Lake Michigan in 1951. Now, what the B-52s were doing, they were flying over nuclear power plants in their bombing runs for practice before they went into Vietnam. That's how they were training the pilots. And they were flying right down over nuclear power plants and then pretending they were dropping a load of bombs. And the power plants were freaking out about it. But this was the military. What are you going to do? Seen a massive fireball because it crashed. So imagine if that had to hit the power plant. All they would have said is like 3 grams of sugar getting into the Great Lakes. The flyovers continued until 1984. This was training rooms right smack over low altitude over nuclear power plants. And then the drone, the vibration from these great big machines could compromise the integrity of the nuclear reactors, folks. St. Louis baby teeth study sparked nuclear test bans 60 years ago. I can't remember the story. I think it was 90,000 children's baby teeth were sent in for analysis, and they all had plutonium in them. That's what they were looking for, and strontium-90, I believe. But if that's what you're finding, then you can count on everything else being in there. So if they got it in their teeth, then it's in their bones, and they're mutating their stem cells as they're growing up, right? Look at this stupid disease factory. And so I got a circle. You see the circle over right there? That's the common spent fuel pool. That's at the same height as the reactors where the tsunami came straight through that. It didn't just go through reactor 1, 2, 3, and 4. It also went through the common spent fuel pool, which roughly would have had at least 10 million pounds into it. And that was lost too. Look at the destruction of the building. Hey, hang on. let's just zoom in for a second. I'll move it over here for you. Let me center it. That's the common spin fuel pool. I'll bring it into the center for you. See all that cement right here? That used to be all grass, but there was so much fuel there, they had to put cement over it to shield the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society. So what you're looking at is the common spin fuel pool. So these buildings are not destroyed that way. How come? Right? So why is that building destroyed, but the other buildings around it are not? Because it detonated, see? And burnt continuously for days. And the reactor cores. And you can see the meltdown on the roof up there, for instance. And look at the damage right over there by the stairs. They lost a fuel pool too. And reactor 6. And the stacks. In fact, the stacks there were around 25 sieverts at the bases. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. One of those stacks they cut off. It took them like 7 years to come up with equipment that didn't die. And it took them something like 5 months or something to cut off the top of the stack because it was going to tip over, which would have been a catastrophic event. Again, that's a picture where they brought students back into the nuclear wasteland. Oh, I forgot. I got to get back to my other window. Hang on. There we go. So these are the official pictures of Reactor 4. The building to the right is the official picture, and the building to the left is the official picture. The fuel pools are 100 feet above the stump to your right. So on thin air, invisible, there's a fuel pool, Dana. 2 of them. Oh, okay. Thanks for clearing that up for me. Geothermal resources offer an off-ramp for risky, costly nuclear project. Geothermal resources offer an off-ramp for genocide machines like nuclear power plants. Well, geothermal is every community could have its own geothermal. And the technology to do that is just mindless. And it can pay for itself in about 7 or 8 years. And so then everybody can be paying $25 a month to heat their buildings and lights and electricity. And you got tons of money to build a new plant and to maintain everything, the whole infrastructure. Because you can't have a future unless you take that route, see? The future can't always be to gouge all the resources of humanity for a corporation, right? There's better ways to do things. And geothermal for greenhouses, for instance, so you can grow food all year long. BPU to consider nuclear power for Los Alamos. Again, they're talking about a small modular reactor, which was the NuScale, really, the carbon-free power project. That was NuScale, right? And look at the scam they pulled off, the Ponzi scheme that they actually pulled off. Billions of dollars stolen for the communities, from communities. Russian state TV guest clashes with a host over nuclear strikes, saying that if NATO intervenes in Ukraine, they were going to lash out with nuclear weapons. But that was all on purpose. That kind of posturing is meant to invoke more spending in all countries to the military-industrial complex. So remember when Ukraine first happened, all the Girl Scouts, all the schools were having bake sales to raise money so Zelensky can buy weapons from the military-industrial complex. I'd never seen nothing like it before. I've never even heard tell of anything like it. Well, like in World War I, a lot of the reserves, a lot of people had to give up their fuels and that, right? And rubber and stuff like that, and gold, and silver, commodities to the military-industrial complex. Consolidated Uranium announces the addition of Tracy to the advisory board. Again, That's the uranium producer, I believe. Lifetime of experience in the nuclear industry. Can you imagine what kind of degenerate that person actually is? Aussies will need to be convinced on nuclear option. Aussies will need to be convinced. It's called brainwashing, right? And the only way you can convince somebody to have something as evil as nuclear, and they've done it successfully many times, obviously, is a sustained propaganda machine in your schools, in your universities, in your governments, in your communities. There's huge money. There's 1,000 public relation firms in North America dedicated to the nuclear industry's propaganda. 1,000 that we know about. I'm sure there's 5 times that here. FDA warns Japan Olympus units over testing violations. I can't remember that story. Japanese shogai player disqualified for not covering nose with mask. Oh, you didn't cover your nose. And it turns out, never mind, because you're not allowed to have a conversation about that stuff. The United Nations will get you a strike on your account if you tries to have a conversation and you don't use their exact narratives. And the people that enforce it, obviously, right, sitting there with their dildos up their asses, and then they hear you talk about a subject and you're not regurgitating nuclear, then they're going to push the Nuke button on you. They're insane. They took down my site, for goodness sakes, when I was out looking for spiders. With 1,600 of these presentations and all the research expeditions. The heavy mortar weapons have already wreaked havoc in Afghanistan, Chechnya, Syria. Oh, these happen to be the same places where they used the dirty, depleted uranium bombs. Will Israel strike Iran's nuclear facility in 2 years? Well, it's possible now, isn't it? We see how crazy Israel is. Complete genocide against the Palestinians. It's a complete genocide, eh? 2.2 million people in a little tiny bit won't have a home. It'll be complete. Every historical, like they're razzing the graveyards with the bulldozers from Caterpillar. And there's no dissenting voices allowed. U.S. urged to apologize for nuke tests in the Marshall Islands. Just the Castle Bravo test itself was equal to 1,000 Nagasaki bombs going off at one time. 1,000, which is a plutonium bomb. And currently in 2019, a study showed over 1 million square kilometers, not miles, but kilometers, is too radioactive to be habitable. Nuclear power ambitions in Ghana receive boost with disposal facilities. Because Ghana, there's no education going on there where the people are able to defend themselves against the nuclear industry, is it? They can't even get rid of their own garbage and they're going to be able to store nuclear. And Chris Singh's Holtec uses new technology for dismantling work at Indian Point Nuclear Power Plant. Of course, if it's anything to do with nuclear engineering or world nuclear news, it's complete propaganda every single time. And just like World Nuclear News, Nuclear Engineering International never puts an author on their assertions, their posts, right? And they get first page all the time at Google and Bing. Ionic exchange-based liquid nuclear waste treatment market. You can't treat nuclear waste. Right, because you can't filter it. The filter is so radioactive after 20 minutes you can never get near it again. You can't neutralize it. You can't. They boil it in acid, nitrous acid, at 3,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures to make their MOX fuel. For goodness sakes, you can't destroy it. You can't burn it in incinerators and destroy it. It can't be destroyed. It's a lethal threat to everything with replicating cells. The intellect behind New Zealand's anti-nuclear stance. The intellect. It's evil and everybody knows it there. Westinghouse to lead decommissioning project in Lithuania, dismantling the reactor in the industry is an industry first. of course, if you look at Westinghouse legacy, they shouldn't be allowed near anything nuclear ever again. They should be charged with crimes against humanity 50 years ago, for goodness sakes. It's the first decommissioning of an RBMK reactor. I can't remember the nuances of the story because we got so many we can't possibly go down that road. And we've been burning through stories for almost 2 hours, and I must admit it doesn't look good for getting through all of them tonight, does it? War Titans bomb between kids in Ukraine and Fukushima, which is because the nuclear plant in Ukraine, right? So they're downplaying. They got so many ways to downplay any story, and they'll just seize up on random opportunities too. Dryden working on an agreement with the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, which is Canada, and the Nuclear Waste Management Organization in Canada is the nuclear industry itself. They got $28 billion for the last 18 years to come up with a solution. And what they do is they pick communities that they know there's going to be a no vote rather, and they'll spend millions of dollars there just throwing it into the community to cause a divide. And they want a no vote. They don't want a solution. And if they want a solution, they would go somewhere where there wasn't this conflict, and they would just build a deep geological repository and start storing this stuff, right? And the places they're picking are prime farmlands on top of that. They're a curse. That's the only way to look at it. Like the International Atomic Energy Agency. Seeds undergo radiation in space to explore biology and genetics for enhanced food security. We don't need enhanced food security. We've got that solved thousands of years ago where you just splice seeds together for traits, right? We don't need nuclear to secure our food. And anything, and I mean anything the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is UN, is involved in, is to be avoided at all costs. They're the opposite of anything useful. Sellafield Limited to be prosecuted after worker fell from a ladder while undertaking maintenance work. Sellafield Limited, which is surrounded by farms as far as the eyes can see, by the way, has endless emissions. There was a meltdown in 1957 that's still hemorrhaging 8 million litres a day into the Atlantic Ocean from a mixed oxide reactor meltdown at Sellafield. No punishment. Someone falls off the ladder, you're going to be prosecuted, man. Oh, we're going to hold you accountable, boy. The nuclear industry doesn't get away with stuff like that around here, I tell you what. And like Sellafield, they got cancer clusters in Crumbia, which is inside of that disease factory, which is a reprocessing site, by the way, which is even more hideous. They got cancer clusters for children, and I got the studies, we've covered them many times, where they claimed that the cancer clusters in children, leukemia clusters in children, is caused by the flu, not by emissions from the disease factory, which everybody acknowledges is the biggest nuclear waste site in Europe. But all the nuclear scientists and academics are producing studies to downplay the plant involvement itself. It's almost too much to bear, right? Visit sunny Chernobyl. That's something I've never heard Chernobyl described as. It's usually described as bleak and cloudy and cold and damp and wet, not sunny. The fad of atomic tourism. Yeah, Las Vegas, atomic city. We got Stephen Young's down there. He'll tell you about it. It's ridiculous down there. There's no birds, no insects, no little lizards, little geckos. And think about, like, these people were made to sit there facing, or to get up and they walk right into ground zero right away. Soon as the explosion goes past them and comes back again, they get up and starts marching into ground zero into a nuclear wasteland. And these people were studied, and their loved ones were studied for the rest of their lives, and they were denied any ability to be able to take care of themselves, to be aware of what was actually going on. That's the Castle Bravo shot right there. It's equal to 1,000 Nagasaki's going off at the same time. Australia's already a nuclear nation, says O'Brien. It's not a nuclear nation, though. It's the furthest thing. Because, like, he's equating having nuclear subs in the future with being a nuclear nation. What does Australia need a nuclear sub for? Can you name one thing you buy as a commodity or in a supermarket that comes from Australia? Because I can't. Do you have a car or do you covet headphones or guitars or anything from Australia? Is anybody out there? India conducts successful launch of a nuclear-capable ballistic missile. They don't need a ballistic missile to hit Pakistan. They're right next door to it. Nuclear Heathrow airport scare could be Lukashenko's style attack, claims a former general. This is where they used polonium-210 or something to poison a Russian what's the name for it now? Change sides? I can't remember off the top of my head. Keep rolling here. We got too many. So first off, Fukushima is a poisoned everybody on the bloody planet. A package set off alarm over contaminated material, which turned out to be uranium. Anybody working at a uranium mine can get their hands on uranium. This man was poisoned, so he didn't tell the British some of the secrets, right? And the British might have done it just so they can demonize Russia, see? Because when it comes to the nuclear industry, you honestly can't believe anything they tell you. Derelict space shuttles, Cold War bunkers, nuclear exclusion zones. Urban Explorer shares his top 5 favorite abandoned places. That's a former Soviet Union space shuttle right there. Kazakhstan, in the Republic of Kazakhstan. Look at that. That's insane, actually. So why would you go into a Fukushima nuclear wasteland? How can you be that stupid? How does that actually work? How can you go into a place where everybody's got abandoned because of massive radioactive fallout? How does that actually work? How do you get that stupid, I wonder? France pushes forward a plan to speed up renewables. What was it? They were going to put solar power in all the parking lots, which is going to give them like 10 gigawatts a year of electricity or something to charge up the electric cars that were coming in the future, right? So it was mandated that if your parking lot can hold like 10 or 20 cars, you had to put in a renewable storage set up to charge electric cars. But a lot of parking lots are barely surviving, right? Because they're taxed incredibly heavily. Why are almost all nuclear power plants surrounded by farms? Well, all the easier to poison everybody with, Dana, worldwide. After all, you can't contain the radiation from the fuel pools. So the best thing to do is poison everybody. Australia is stuck in the past by not accepting zero emissions energy solutions. Well, nuclear is not zero emissions. My goodness, come on. Don't be so silly. Let me see what we're doing here. I guess there's no way I'm going to get through all this tonight because I work like a dog all day. I'm just too burnt out. We gave it a good go, though. I tell you what. We only got 800 more to get through. There's no way we're going to get through that tonight. We will, though. We will pick this up tomorrow night. I'm going to delete everything that I already done. And so I'll pick up tomorrow night and I'll add February. Now, February wasn't a really good month for me this year because I had 3 heart attacks. I was in the hospital in the intensive care unit for 21 days. And leading up to me going into the hospital, I was still doing shows right up until the day before I ended up in the hospital with heart attacks. So don't worry about. So this will work out. We're gonna kick this again tomorrow night. Because I think, right, that it's important. It's important to, my God, how much do I really got? It's disgusting. I got a ridiculous amount. And that'll make tomorrow a little bit easier, because February, we never done that many shows. I'll tell you how many shows we done in February. Because I was a sick... I barely survived. 7 stints put in, so... Which is a record here we're on to. And they flew in a special team from America to do the surgery, and then they flew out again. The locals doctor said they weren't allowed to operate on me. Okay, hang on. I want to see how many I got to get ready to... How many? Because I know February was a pretty slack month. Oh, yeah, baby. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We only done 5 shows in February. I was in intensive care. The day I got out, that night we done a show. On nuclear. That night, eh? Then I slept almost till the next night, then we done another show. Then it was the weekend, I believe. And then we done a few more shows and the month was gone, right? And then we kicked ass February, March, April, May, June. And it was such a difficult recovery. Okay, well, that's good. Let's close the poll down. I hope everybody gives me a thumbs up on likes tonight if you make it this far in the video. Now, when the show's over, my last show, just bear with me 1 second before I close that down. I want to drag up. And my last show, when the show was over, I had 11 views. I had 35 likes and 11 views. Google burns me now on the views for every single show. So just bear with me 1 second. My goodness, I'm a bit slow tonight, ain't I? Here we go. Oh, I didn't import the show from today, so I can't bring it up. Okay, so are the pro-nuclear destroying Earth and its 8 million species with endless radioactive fallout? Yeah, the answer is almost 100% yes, which is the correct answer. Hi, Sardines, Tony, Dana. Good night, everybody. Stephen Young donated $50. Thank you, Stephen. It's hard to appreciate how deep in the hole I actually am. So that's a big deal for me. Hi, Sandra. And Wise Person and Blue Jay. And Albert. I know Albert was feeling terrible during Christmas. Phonogen. Good night, everybody. Richard. That was Richard was feeling terrible, rather. I hope he's feeling better. And Bobby and Dana Nasana. Hi, Dana. Hugs for Stephen Young, and he's lovely. And I don't know if I'll get through everybody till after. I'll have to read everybody after. We're going to end the show here in a minute. We'll pick up tomorrow night where I left off. I deleted everything that we covered tonight, so it'll be easy to find my way back to the kickoff for tomorrow night. Oh yeah, hang on 1 second. I want to show you. Let's see what the views I got after the show is over. I want you to go to the front page when the show is over, and I'm going to bring up the views here right now. I'm going to refresh that page. Refreshing, saw. So I got 26 views and 35 likes, and we got 45 or something on the poll. And I noticed we had like 40 live viewers at a few points there. And it was basically around 35 for most of the night. People coming and going. So normally I would get 100, 120, 140 views after the show is over. I'll have around 26, 27, 28 views when the show is over tonight. And so that was great. And thank everybody for finding the time, the energy. And we appreciate it. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. These shows go really quick because you're covering just endless amount of stories. Tomorrow night I'll try to go a little bit quicker than the night. We'll try to get through more stories. Have a great night. Hugs for everybody. Thank you, everybody. Merry Christmas. I know it's hard for some people, but you made it, and we got an amazing week ahead of us. We're going to cover a silly amount of stories. It's going to be a lot of fun, actually, because we cover so many stories. See you in the next show, everybody. Take care. And there's links in the bottom description if you can chip in, buy me a coffee, help pay for oil changes, and all the other stuff. It never goes astray. Have a great night, and we'll see everybody on the next show. Take care.